I'm still relatively new to Reddit, so I don't really know too much about it. I am a fan of YouTube videos, though. When I'm doing things around the house, I like to listen to readings on YouTube of Reddit stories, both hilarious and terrifying ones. One day, as I was cleaning, a video that I was listening to had finished and automatically played the next one, which was a stalker reading story. After hearing other people's encounters, I decided that maybe I am ready to share one of mine too. I posted a story of mine earlier and it got a lot of positive reinforcement, so I think I'm going to talk about another. This is an encounter that went on over the span of maybe a month, and then continued on from a distance for the next 2 years. This is a pretty long story, so I'm sorry if it gets boring. Growing up, I lived in a small town. Now, I don't mean footloose small with a mere 14,000 people. I mean really small with only 1,000 people when I moved there in first grade. I didn't really make any close friends all throughout my school days, and I wanted to get pretty far away. The farthest my parents would let me go for school, though, was a few states over to study Japanese at a private university in Ohio. My freshman year flew by. I met a ton of new people, and my Facebook exploded with friend requests from both domestic and international students alike. Not remembering everyone I met, I accepted them all. I was young and excited to make new friends, and I ended up making a lot of good friends. I was actually kind of, dare I say it, popular. By my second year, the leader of my department had deemed me the big sister of the program. It was a small program, but I was usually the one that people would turn to for help. I was good at what I was studying, and I was proud of it. There was a building on campus that was open 24 hours for students. It had couches, armchairs, and coffee tables on one half, and tables and regular chairs on the other, separated by a big fireplace. There were also 2 little secluded loft areas for small groups that wanted a little more privacy. People would go there to study or just hang out with friends. There was a cafe attached to it, so it made it ideal for a study spot. Coffee plus students equal productivity. Because I am a coffee fanatic, some might say a coffee snob, I was always in the study building where I had access to coffee when I wasn't in class or catching those oh so rare hours of sleep. The only problem, well, if you can call it a problem, was that because I was the go-to person for the program, I would only sit down for a few minutes before someone would come up and sit with me, be it to study or to chat, usually the latter. When the end of the sophomore year was rolling around, the dreaded exam time was approaching quickly. I was studying abroad my junior year, and I wanted to leave my school on a positive note. I was desperately trying to get some studying done, but people kept sitting to chat with me in the study building. And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. Oh my gosh, I'm like so popular that I can't even stand it. No, not that. I loved my friends, but they couldn't really grasp the concept of silent studying. A few of them were already done with exams and just wanted to talk. I decided to try my luck in the library, instead of heading to the study building. I went to the library and sat down on one of the little tables by a big window. I was on a roll. I had gotten through quite a few big projects and finished writing one of my presentations. I sat up a little straighter and stretched out my arms in front of me, letting out a satisfied sigh. A voice from behind me suddenly said, "You're working hard?" The library wasn't a popular space to study. Everyone usually went to the study building or got private rooms on the other side of the building, so the sudden voice behind me made me jump a bit. Yeah, I replied. It was a Chinese guy on the heavy side, a few inches taller than me. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No, I don't remember his name, so for this story, I'll just call him Chen." "Yeah, we met at orientation. We're friends on Facebook," he said. His English was good, but sometimes his accent was hard to understand. He still didn't give me his name, but he looked at me so expectantly that I felt bad for not remembering him. "Oh, yeah," I blurted out. "It's nice to see you." How are your finals going? We talked a little about school and some other small talk, but it was getting late though, so I excused myself to go back to my share house for the evening. Next day, I avoided the study building altogether, hoping to get the same amount of studying done that I had done the day before. I walked quietly into the hall, glancing around. I didn't see Chen, so I went to sit at my table from the day before and I sat down. It wasn't 15 minutes before he appeared though, sitting down next to me and trying to strike up a conversation. I was a little annoyed, but I stayed polite. I excused myself after about an hour of awkward conversation with the stranger, and I gave up for the evening. It was still early, but I grabbed some friends and we went out for dinner at a local diner. The next day, I decided to try again. I went into the library and, much to my dismay, I saw him sitting at my favorite table. At first, I was annoyed, but then I thought, wait a second, he is here first, so I can just grab a different table and he won't notice. I walked to the other side of the room, passing rows and rows of bookshelves, sitting down at a corner table. If he found me, it would have to have been because he was actively looking. About an hour later, I heard footsteps heading around the quiet room, and then a quickened pace headed straight for me. Hey! I groaned internally, but put on a polite smile. Oh, hey there. He had brought his stuff and sat down across from me. After a painful half hour, I finally gave up and decided to head home. The next day, I decided to talk to the front desk about getting a private room. They were on a different floor, so surely I would be safe there. Nope, he found me. After knocking repeatedly on the door and staring at me, I could no longer pretend that I didn't see or hear him, even with my headphones on. If I waited much longer, I'm sure the other people in the area would be just as annoyed as me, and I didn't want to ruin their study time. I opened the door. Oh hey, I was actually just getting ready to leave, I lied. So soon? I was hoping you could check my English paper. Geez, way to make me feel guilty. Well, I could spare a few minutes. Cool. He pushed his way in, sitting down at the table. Sighing, I sat back down and took his paper. As I started checking it, he started talking about how he never shared a meal with a girl before, because he thinks it's such an intimate thing. I was checking his paper as quickly as I could, trying to get away from the awkward encounter, so I let out the occasional uh-huh and head nod, barely listening. Suddenly, he started pulling food out of his bag from a nearby Chinese restaurant and he handed me a fork. I'm sitting there thinking, wait, what? He just said that he thinks sharing food with a girl is intimate. Luckily, I was able to form words. Your paper looks good. I don't see any real English mistakes. I can't stay though. I had plans to eat dinner with some friends. Sorry. I passed him his paper, stood up and laughed. Slightly creeped out. I would have blamed it on cultural differences, but I knew a ton of other Chinese kids on campus and none of them were as weird as Chen. In fact, I was close to a lot of the other kids because they were so cool. But Chen was giving off some really scary vibes and I didn't want to see him again. The next day, I decided it would be better to just study at the study building. I would rather be surrounded by chatterboxed friends than alone with a creepy stranger. The loft was open when I arrived. You have to climb stairs to get to it and you can't really tell if anyone is up there, let alone who. Unless you are really trying to look up through the cracks or go halfway up the stairway. Practically giddy with joy, I rush up the stairs and settle into the armchair with a cup of coffee from the cafe. The giddiness of finding the loft open quickly wore off, though as I went into productive mode. I got a lot of studying done, but after about 2 hours, movement downstairs caught my eye. Chen was walking around, looking around at the open floor. I took a deep, quiet breath and tried to push the paranoia down. No big deal, right? Maybe he was tired of the library and wanted to study in this building for a change. For the first time in 2 years. And then I heard it, those awful words. He was asking a group of people I knew if they had seen me, asking about me by name. Luckily, they arrived after me and didn't see me go up into the loft. I was safe. He looked around a little more and finally laughed. The next day, I promised a friend of mine that I would help him with his paper. My friend was 6.5 feet tall, ripped like a quarterback, a phenomenon of a man named Tetsuo. We agreed to meet in the loft at a set time, and I arrived a bit early to make sure that we could actually get the loft, since that they were a bit popular. I was sitting in the armchair when I heard him start coming up the stairs. He was 15 minutes early. My heart dropped when I looked up, though. It wasn't Tetsuo. It was Chen. He silently stalked over to the sofa, dropping his things, and sat on the coffee table in front of me. He put a hand on each of my arms of the chair, locking me in, and proceeded to forcefully kiss me. He was bigger than me in both height and weight, so it took a lot to push him off of me. I'm sure that the rush of adrenaline helped. "What are you doing?" I shrieked. "I'm in love with you. I want to be with you. I want you to marry me and move back to China with me and start a family with me." He started to lean in again. I leaned back and tried to push him away. "Get away from me." He leaned back a little but kept his hands on the arms of the chair and his knees on either side of me, locking me in so I couldn't get away. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Did he really ask me what was wrong? Was he stupid as well as crazy? No, just no, get away from me." I tried to wriggle free, but he was stronger than me. "I don't even know you." "But I know you," he said. "I need you. I love you." I was about to scream for help when Tetsuo came pounding up the stairs in a rush. Chen may have been bigger than me, but Tetsuo was way bigger than Chen. He looked right at me. "Are you okay?" I replied saying, "Help me." He started walking towards us and Chen immediately leaned back and let me go. Tetsuo took my hand, pulling me to sit on the sofa right next to him, saying, "You promised to help me with my English paper." I was shaking, but I felt significantly safer with Tetsuo there to help me. He could easily take down Chen if it came to that. Chen didn't leave. He sat in the armchair that I had just vacated and waited. Did he think that Tetsuo would just leave and he could continue to harass me? We finished Tetsuo's paper in about an hour. I took my time explaining certain grammar points and spelling patterns, hoping that we could take long enough and Chen would give up and go away. He didn't. And Tetsuo got up and stood between my stalker and me. "Let's go get some food." He picked up my stuff, took my hand, and pulled me down the stairs without a second glance at Chen. We didn't get dinner for obvious reasons. I didn't have an appetite. Tetsuo did walk me home though, and I told him all about Chen. He said that until finals were over and until I left the university to go home for the summer, he would act as my bodyguard. He said he would take me to all my classes and stay with me outside of class. And he was true to his word. But Chen was always within view. The day of my last exam and the day that I was leaving, I met with Tetsuo in the study building. He looked around and didn't see Chen. With that, I said that I was going to buy a coffee from the cafe. Upon entering the cafe, I rushed to the counter and ordered my usual, a medium black coffee. My blood turned to ice as a voice behind me said, "Make it a large on me." Chen. He was hidden in the cafe, knowing that I would be going there for my coffee like I always did. "No," I told the woman behind the counter. "My usual medium, please. I'll be paying for it myself, too." "Let me," he insisted. There was a little bit of back and forth between us, thinking that we were a couple or something. The woman behind the counter smiled and said, "Oh, just let the guy get you a cup of coffee." I begrudgingly agreed and rushed away as soon as it was in my hand. He was still paying. He caught up to me before I could reach Tetsuo though. So close. There was a pillar in the way though, so Tetsuo couldn't see me. Every time I tried to move, Chen stepped into my path and stopped me. He began begging again. Marriage, family. No way. Tetsuo realized that I was taking too long and came to rescue me, telling Chen to stay away from me. As we were walking away, Chen said, "I won't give up. Not ever. Not even if you marry someone else." I took my last exam and moved back to Illinois that evening. I did find Chen on my Facebook and I blocked him. It wasn't hard to locate him after he had started liking all of my photos. I studied abroad in Japan for a year and had to go back to my uni for my senior year. I had a boyfriend now, who is now my husband. A friend and I had rented a house just off campus, but the internet wasn't going to be set up for another few days. So I went to use the free Wi-Fi at the study building. While I was talking to my boyfriend, who was still in Japan, Chen appeared in front of me. He immediately began to try to talk to me, and then noticed that I was talking on the phone and decided to stand there silently, staring and waiting. My blood ran cold again, and I began to panic, telling my boyfriend in Japanese what was happening. I had told him about Chen while we were in Japan. He told me to run away or to find someone nearby to help me. Instead, the anger in me began to rise. I wasn't some pitiful little girl that needed help whenever something happened. When I was in Japan, I had experiences that demanded I stand up for myself, and this time wasn't any different. I looked at him and said, "I'm talking to my boyfriend. Please leave me alone." He stood there, staring at me for what felt like hours, though I'm sure it was only a few moments. After narrowing his eyes and glaring at my phone, he walked away. I managed to avoid him for most of the year, but I almost always saw him lurking nearby, staring at me. Because I was almost always surrounded by friends though, he never dared to come near and beg me for marriage again. He tried to approach me more than once when I was alone, but I made it clear to him that I would scream if he touched me. I kept to public places and made sure to never, ever be in an empty place. I think it helped that Tetsuo was usually by my side too. I live in Japan now with my husband. It's been 3 years since I graduated, and I haven't seen or heard from Chen since. Okay everyone, so a little backstory first. I live and work in a town in Shenzhen, China called Shizing. Shizing is maybe the biggest factory town in the world with over 1,000 electronic cigarette factories alone, plus all the other factories. So, as a foreigner in my 20s, I live to explore around and find cool bars, Western food, and of course, lovely Chinese girls. There's a bus that goes from my district to downtown for pretty cheap, and it goes quite a distance rather fast, so lately, I've been back and forth a lot. So here's where it gets interesting. I was on a date with a lovely lady last Saturday night, and when all was said and done, I was waiting for the bus like I always do. I went and sat in the back of the bus and planned to sleep for the hour ride, but this local had other plans. He came and sat next to me and we started to talk with my minimal Mandarin skills. Nothing struck me as weird about him at first except for his teeth, and he lived by me. So, there's a local bar in my little town that I go to every day. They have pizza, pasta, and bar food, and it's honestly the best pizza I've had in China. A few weeks ago before the bus incident, I posted a picture to my WeChat at the restaurant of a beautiful pepperoni sausage and olive pizza, doused with Parmesan and Tabasco with a caption that says, "I'm going in." There is a lot of activity on the post among the local guys that I hang out with at the bar. Well, yesterday I'm at work and I decided to take a look at the WeChat newsfeed. I see a picture at my local bar of my favorite food with the same caption, "I'm going in," and even with these same emojis. So being that I can't read Chinese, I assume it's one of my drinking buddies, right? Wrong. The guy from the bus knew I went there every day, and he showed up 2 hours before I was off work and waited for me for more than 4 hours. I hit the owner up and told him there's a creepy guy waiting there for me, and then he stole my picture and we were trying to figure out what was going on. He joked about him maybe taking a love interest in me or wanting to steal my identity to meet girls. Anyway, I waited an extra long time before going to the bar yesterday. I went home and cleaned up a bit, did some laundry, went to the store, and then finally headed to the bar. I arrived and the owner was sitting outside at our table that we always sit at, and as I'm waking up, my buddy sent me a message saying that I think that guy is still here waiting for you. So at this point, this guy's on his second meal and has been there well over 4 hours. I went in, didn't recognize him really. I was pretty drunk, as usual coming from downtown, but he knew exactly who I was. His face lit up with this huge creepy smile and he started laughing. I simply got a beer and went back outside. He sat at a table with a view of my buddy and I and just ate his food and watched. Later on he came outside, but I was saved by my local little brothers who came and invited me to play basketball. A little bit of backstory. I had just finished high school and had recently turned 18 when all of this occurred. I was looking forward to starting university and was going to move out of my parents' house into student housing closer to the campus. As a result, I started looking for a job closer to my residence. I found one about a 5-minute walk from where I was going to be living, and it was perfect for me. I was to be a barista in a tiny little coffee kiosk on one of the coolest streets in the city. The street was sort of known for prostitution and drugs, but it was also super popular as it hosted some of the most interesting events and also contained some of the nicest thrift stores in the city. What was even more ideal about my new job was the fact that I worked right across the road from my best friend. Let's call her Phoebe. At the time, Phoebe was in love with her job. She was actively being given more responsibilities and she was being promised the world by her employers. Many of these promises turned out to be false at the time, but that's another story. During one of her shifts, Phoebe was approached by a man who had seemingly become a regular at the place that she was working. We'll call him Richard. He told her that if she ever wanted to leave her job, he had just become the manager of a new restaurant a little ways down the road. Phoebe kindly denied his offer. He approached her several more times with this same offer before she recommended him our other close friend. We can call her Mia. Mia was hesitant to take the position at first because she had a passionate hatred for hospitality and greatly prefers retail, but she did need the extra money at the time and she took the job. The day that Mia was signing her contract, Phoebe and I both finished work early around 4. So we told Mia that we would meet her at her new job once we had finished, and then we would go and do something after. Phoebe and I went to the cake shop next door and sat outside her work while we waited for Mia. When they finished, Richard followed Mia outside to come say hi to Phoebe. The girls introduced him to me and a conversation ensued. He seemed like a friendly guy, if not a little bit awkward. He was late 30s, early 40s, bird-like in appearance, quite short, balding, larger in size, and he seemed very greasy. As the conversation continued, I began to tease Mia a little bit as friends do. I saw no harm in it, as she was one of my best friends and she had made a similar joke at my expense prior to this interaction. Richard's demeanor suddenly seemed to switch. He became somewhat catty in defense of Mia. He retorted back that if I was going to be mean to his staff, that he would bar me from every store in the street that we worked on. This seemed ridiculous, but he claimed to be friends with the security guard that worked in the street. I actually was friends with this man, and when I asked him about it, he told me that he had never heard of Richard before. Richard said these things to me as though he was joking, but he was so persistent about it that I got incredibly uncomfortable and I wanted to cry. It was from this interaction that he nicknamed me Trouble. I also feel it needs to be noted that he didn't scold Mia or Phoebe at all for the same behavior. Phoebe sensed my discomfort and told me that we had to leave as we had plans. Flash forward a few weeks and Phoebe and I decide to go see Mia at work again. Richard intrudes on our conversation yet again, and again he singles me out from the group, teasing me and only referring to me as trouble. This time I just play along as I can tell it isn't going to stop. He asks Mia if she is after another job as he needs someone to clean his home, and lives all the way out where my parents and Mia live. Mia tells him that she can't as she already has too many responsibilities, but I tell him that I might know a few people in the area that might do it, and I give him my phone number. Richard takes this as a sign that I have agreed to do it myself, and begins texting me incessantly about setting up a meeting. This man is much older than me and lives alone in a rural area. Suddenly, my instincts kick in, and I try to get out of it by telling him that I can't drive. He says that he can pick me up from the nearest train station. I don't want to come across as impolite or have my best friend's boss resent her because of me, so I make the mistake of agreeing. However, I tell him that my sister will be helping me as she is looking for a part-time job, and my dad will be dropping me off. I do this in order to have some backup and so that my dad knows my whereabouts. Richard goes on to complain about how I don't trust him, and claims that his house is very small, and the $100 that he's going to pay me won't be enough to split with my sister. I tell him that I just want to provide her with work experience, and finally agrees, asking how old she is. My sister is 17. Richard and I finally find a time that I am not working to schedule a meeting. This meeting is held at his place of work, and I feel a lot more comfortable sitting in the main restaurant surrounded by people, as I thought he was going to hold a meeting in an office. We begin talking about the responsibilities of the job. He tells me it'll be basic things like tidying up, vacuuming, the usual. I agree, and he then goes to tell me that he will also be expecting me to do his laundry. I think this is a bit odd, as he's only paying a small amount for such a large job. He assures me his house is small and not that messy, but continuously claims it just needs a woman's touch. I nod and ignore the fact that this grown man thinks that, just because he's a man, it means he doesn't need to know how to maintain his own home. Now, this is where things start to get creepy. Near the end of the meeting, he asks me again how old my sister is, and when I say 17, his face drops. He then starts telling me about how he previously posted this ad on Craigslist, and this 60-year-old woman replied offering to do it in her lingerie. He tells me how he didn't even ask for that in the ad, but she had offered and he was put off completely. He then proceeds to tell me that he would be willing to pay more to someone between the ages of 18 and 30 if they were willing to do that, but he would never request that because he's not a pervert. I call BS at this and tell him then and there that this meeting is done and that I have to go and meet Phoebe. He asked me if he had made me uncomfortable. Well, yeah, you did. But I say no on that. I'll get back to him. This strange man who I have only met 3 times then attempts to hug me, but I ignore it and awkwardly wave goodbye from less than 3 feet away. I boost it down the street to Phoebe's work and tell her the whole story. She tells me that I can't do it and I tell her I know, but I don't know how to tell him that without risking my own safety or Mia's job. Fortunately, Richard gives me the perfect out. He texts me later this afternoon telling me the hopes that I am okay with cats because he is a small one. I see this as the perfect opportunity and lie to him, telling him that my sister and I are both deathly allergic, and neither of us will be open to doing the job. Richard accepts this reasoning after a little persuasion, and I think that I'm finally done with him. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Richard proceeded to text me every day asking if I'm mad at him, or if he had made me uncomfortable, asking me how my day was and so on. Just behaving like a preteen in a new relationship basically. And the more that I ignored him, the more he texted. I finally blocked him in March of 2019. This escapade had begun 4 to 5 months prior to this. The blocking didn't stop him though. Mia informed me that Richard was no longer going to be working there, as he had to go in for surgery and we wouldn't have to see him anymore. You see, Richard hadn't only been harassing me, but Mia and Phoebe too, just to a lesser extent. One Saturday morning while I was working, setting up at around 7:45, Richard showed up at my work. The divider was down as we were close, though he came and stood in the doorway, the only exit that I had available to me at the time. He started asking me why I was ignoring him and telling me about his surgery. I told him that he wasn't allowed to stand there as it was a fire exit, but he didn't budge. Fortunately, my boss showed up shortly after and told Richard that he was going to phone the security if he didn't move. My boss was kind of an ass on most days, but holy crap, was I grateful for him that morning. Roughly a month after that experience, I thought Richard was gone from my life. I was living in my new apartment. Mia was around all the time and loved her job without Richard there. Things were going well for us. One morning after a night of drinking, me and the flatmates became peckish. I decided to order us some greasy food on a food delivery app. Lo and behold, guess who our delivery driver is? Yeah, Richard. I turned to my boyfriend at the time and tell him that he has to go collect the food. He doesn't understand, but Mia assures him that it's important. He agrees and goes out to collect it. Richard is not driving the vehicle he claims to be driving in the app, and at first we're confused. Plus, the number plate is also different. Mia and I watch from his bedroom window, and the interaction takes much longer than expected. He comes back and we ask what took him so long. He tells us that Richard refused to give him the food until he could prove that he was my boyfriend. He had recognized my name from the app and now he knew where we lived. Me and I tell my flatmates the story of what happened, and we all agree that it's a good idea to go to my RA. The RA reports it to upper management, and they say they can't really do anything about it, but if he comes in again, to call their security. A few months go by and there are no Richard sightings until I order from the same app again. Yet again, Richard is our driver, and yet again in a different car. I send my boyfriend to go collect the food again and report the incident to my RA again, and the food delivery app. I know that I was stupid in not immediately reporting it to campus security, as I had much more proof of the creepy behavior than he had of his innocence, but I was naive, and I didn't want my parents to find out about it at the time. Fortunately, I haven't seen Richard since then. This is actually my stepmom and her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me up to a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're gonna call her Macy, grew up as a kind of privileged teen in the 70s. And her mom had moved with her family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school and a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. Popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff. Hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. And my stepmom has raccoon eyes and it looks like she's hating everything. Anyways, because of Louie's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, you know, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space, but there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my mom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out and she groaned into Lily and begrudgingly said okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking, and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get in the back. They settled in and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was the point it hit her what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat, and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak out my stepmom, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be, and he said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16 and 17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a foot on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information. They just drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack, log cabin looking like place right there in a clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood, and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it saying, "I'll be right back, don't go anywhere," and he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. And so they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. And they wandered around looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude just to run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried, red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her crap after seeing it, and my mom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees, until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying that she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is in the 70s, there's no cell phones, there was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed like to be a couple of hours, when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom predictably started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was planning her dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to the car as quickly as they could, jumped in and peeled out before they had even shut the doors.